enjoy it. Thank you for watching my videos. One thing I'll say is, when I watch other YouTube channels, if I've watched that channel for more than 5 times, I consider myself to be a regular visitor to that channel, and therefore I subscribe. So there's a message to you. Thank you very much. Someone asked me yesterday in the comments if I was going to make a video about how Joe Schmidt is going to plan to beat the Springboks this weekend in Cape Town, and I thought, yeah, why don't I make a video about it? So here it is. How are the Wallabies going to beat the Springboks in Cape Town on Saturday? Let's find out. G'day everyone, welcome to Inside Rugby with Mark. Now if you haven't been here before, my name is Mark. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan and I'm living here in Cancun in Mexico. Yes, and I love making videos about rugby and talking to everybody out there about the rugby championship at the moment, because it's a fascinating competition. Now I was asked, how does Joe Schmidt turn the Wallabies around to beat South Africa in Cape Town on Saturday? And I thought that's a really interesting question. So the first thing I did was I went back to our community poll for the first test match, and I had a look at that, and 87% of you said that the Springboks were going to win that game, and just 13% believed the Wallabies were going to win. Well, as of the poll I put up yesterday, so since the poll I put up yesterday for the second test, we've got 75% of people saying South Africa are going to win this one, and 25% saying the Wallabies, and the votes are about the same as they were for last week. So that's pretty interesting, isn't it? A week is a long time in the game of rugby. So what's going to happen? Well, we haven't seen Joe Schmidt's team first, so that's the first thing I'll say, and I'm a little bit worried about injuries in that team still, because Harry Wilson, if he's out, that's going to be a big blow to that team. But maybe they get Rob Valentini back, who knows? We'll have to wait and see until Joe Schmidt makes that announcement, and I will make a video as soon as that team gets announced with my my latest thoughts around it based on the team being announced. But just looking at the way the game went last week and what we can probably expect in Cape Town, given the fact that Rassie's made the changes that he has, I tend to look at it this way. I think despite the South Africans being a little bit down about the loss, there's a lot to take away from that first 20 minutes, because that was sensational rugby from the Springboks in terms of control, dominance, possession, territory and game management. And as we all know by now, that fell away of course for the rest of the game. But I think that that first 20 minutes is such a telling tale of what could happen between these two teams this weekend, because you've now got the players in the Springboks team, and this is no disrespect against Manie Libbok and Fassi, because if you've watched my videos over the last couple of years, you know I like those two players a lot, and I thought Manie did okay in the weekend. Definitely in that first 20 minutes he was controlling that game as much as anybody. But I think now with Andre Pollard in and Willie LaRue, that makes a really big difference to this backline and the way that this game can be controlled. So if the South African forwards, and this is the big if they can get that kind of dominance that we saw in the first 20 minutes again in Cape Town, we're not at altitude, it's going to be cooler and all those other things, maybe not cooler as an air temperature, but easier on the players. And if they're able to replicate what they did at Ellis Park in that first 20 minutes for the majority of the game, I'm not saying they can do it all the game, because as you know, I'm one of those people that believe that there's always going to be momentum swings in a game of rugby, and the Australians will have their opportunities in this test match. But if the Springboks are able to come out and play that kind of controlling rugby for 60% of the game, then they're going to win the game in Cape Town. So what does Joe Schmidt have to do? Well, I looked at certain areas of the game for the Wallabies in the weekend where I thought they were very good. And the first one was Nick Frost and Will Skelton in the locks. They're doing a really good job, I believe. Nick Frost had a wonderful series against the British and Irish Lions, and he's continued that form into this series against the Springboks and into the Rugby Championship. And we all know Will Skelton's involvement and contribution to this Wallabies team is enormous. So he's going to have to step up again and do what he did at least at Ellis Park and give Joe Schmidt at least 60 minutes, I think, in this game in Cape Town in the weekend. So that's going to be one area they need to look at. Now, James Slipper's not going to be there in the front row, and I think that's going to be a negative thing for the Wallabies in this game. I thought their scrum did pretty well against the Springboks, and we didn't see the kind of dominance that I was expecting to see from the front row in the Springboks. So whether or not Slipper's replacement is going to be able to work with Pollard and Taniela Tupou, who I expect to be the other front rows, that's a big question mark. So big question mark over whether the front row of the Wallabies can be as good as they were last weekend, and that's going to have to be an imperative if the Wallabies are going to do well and have a chance of winning this game. And then you move to the loose forwards for the Wallabies, and I thought Tom Hooper and Fraser McWright were very, very good, along with Harry Wilson, and of course Harry Wilson scored those 2 tries. So I thought that was a wonderful performance by Tom Hooper and Fraser McWright. They did some clutch steals at key moments. Their defence was very good, and they weren't overawed at all. You know, Fraser McWright could hardly walk at the end of that game. He was just absolutely shot. But that's what you expect from your team. So those guys should find it a little bit easier because they're not at altitude this weekend. But it's never easy coming up against the BOKS, and of course the BOKS are going to be revitalised this weekend. So it's going to be really important. Harry Wilson's going to be an important key to this, not only through his number 8 skills, but also through his leadership. I'm liking him more and more as a leader every game I see him play. So those 3 are going to have to be really on point for the Wallabies again to have a good game. And then the back line, what did we see last week? Well, we saw some spontaneity. We saw them take their opportunities. But we also saw Tom Wright drop a few high balls. So will that be an area that Andre Pollard goes to this week and test out the Wallabies in the back 3? We're not going to see Dylan Peach either. So there's going to be another change on the wing for the Wallabies. So that might be a little bit of a disruption. Are they going to be able to plug that gap? That's going to be an interesting thing to watch. So I expect Pollard to give the back 3 of the Wallabies a hard time with the high ball, particularly in the early stages. And Grant Williams will probably do that with a couple of box kicks, and the South Africans will make sure they're contestable, and that's going to add some pressure on the Australian back 3. So they're going to have to deal with that. That's another area of the game I think Joe Schmidt will be focusing on this week in training and making sure they feel confident under the high ball. So they played the spontaneous game. They took the opportunities when they were there off the South African errors, and they created a few things. So when there was an intercept opportunity, Su'a Ali got it and he took off for a try. Angus Bell's pass to Harry Wilson was fantastic, so that was a great setup for that try. So they're going to have to do some things like that again. But one of the areas I think Schmidt's going to turn to, which I saw was very effective last weekend, was their kicking strategy. Once they worked out what to do, and it took them a little while because they didn't do it well at all in the first 20 minutes. But there was a couple of times where Nick White put a kick in behind the South African defence, and the kicks were almost perfect. They were in that position where the South African wingers were having to go back to get the ball, and it allowed the Australians an opportunity to come up and contest very quickly on that ball, but also to push their defensive line up and have an opportunity to put the pressure on the South Africans. By doing those kicks, you also enable the South African forwards to turn around and have to go back and defend. And if you're doing that a number of times, then that takes a bit of energy away from the South African pack. So I think that'll be another ploy that Joe Schmidt goes to this weekend, either through Nick Wright or James O'Connor if he's going to be the number 10, which I'm suspecting he will be. I think that's a tactic that the Aussies will play to try and turn the South Africans around. And I think they'll do that more than they'll do the high ball. I think Nick White will do a couple of box kicks, but they'll be more clearing kicks, I think, in terms of defensive position. But I like the opportunity where the Wallabies can put that kick through. And I tell you what, Len Ekitau can do that really well as well. So we could see that grubber kick go in behind the South African defensive line, turn Diolandi and Creel around, get the wingers turned around, and put them under pressure back in their own half, in their own 22. I think that's a play that we might see quite a bit from Joe Schmidt's team this weekend, and then they'll work out whether or not it's working. Now, what I like about this Wallabies team, which is, there's a number of things I like about this Wallabies team, but one of the things I really like is their ability to stay in the game. And it wasn't just last week we saw that in the third test match against the British and Irish Lions. We saw it in the second test match, and we also saw it in the first test match. And we saw it in their warm-up game against Fiji, where they won that one right in the last minute of the game. So this team has the ability to stay there for 80 minutes, and that's dangerous no matter who you're playing. And we saw it last week to the extreme, where they were down 22 points and they believed in themselves and they came back and they were able to snatch that game. But I don't think there's going to be any number of points that South Africa can have at half time as a lead, if they've got a lead, or early in the second half, where they can feel comfortable against this Australian team. There's going to have to be a mindset from the Springboks to go for 80 minutes to make sure you keep this Australian team out, because if they get a sniff at all, if they're behind, they're going to have a chance to get back into the game, because that's just who this Australian team is. They play for that green and gold jersey, they play for each other, they've got the passion, and now they've got the belief. They've beaten the world's best rugby team. They've beaten the world champions. That's given them everything they need to go into this Cape Town test and believe that they can win this game as well. Now, I was talking last year about Joe Schmidt turning this team around, and I was an early adopter of Joe Schmidt and believing in him. And he's done everything that I thought he would do. He's given a lot of young players an opportunity to come into this team. A lot of these guys we didn't see under Eddie Jones. He didn't give them the opportunity. And they've absolutely flourished under Joe Schmidt, so that's been a fantastic thing. He's also got them playing to their DNA, which is open, expansive rugby, and playing at pace, which I think is going to trouble a lot of teams if they're able to keep this going. So what we're going to need to see on Saturday is a continuation of that. They're going to have to keep playing at pace, rely on their fitness. Are they getting tired now after all these tough games against the British and Irish Lions in the game last weekend at altitude? They must be getting tired. And of course there's the injury factor as well. Are they going to get Rob Valentini back? And how is Harry Wilson going to pull up? Those are really two big factors, I think, for this particular game, because any kind of freshness that they can deploy at Cape Town, at DHL Stadium on Saturday, I think is going to be a bonus for them, because they're going to have to be really on the game for 80 minutes. Now, do I think they can win? Yes, of course they can win. Are they going to win? I think it's unlikely. I think the Springboks have got the right team to continue to do what they did in the first 20 minutes last week, and I think that's what Rassie's going to be looking for. I think after all the emotion of that loss last weekend, and the team sat down and they had their honest conversation, and Rassie and the coaches put their hand on their heart and said, yes, we're as much to blame for this loss. I think after all that was done, and they go back and reflect on that game, they'll say, look, we played an outstanding game of rugby in that first 20 minutes. It wouldn't matter what team they were up against in World Rugby at the moment. They would have had 20 odd points on the board, in my opinion. It was that good. And from then on, that's when they lost it. So the blueprint is there. And all the South Africans have to do, and it's easy to say, isn't it? All the South Africans they have to do now is to go out there and continue that for 50, 60, 65 minutes. And if they're able to do that, then they're going to win the game. And the Wallabies are going to find it very, very difficult. And we all know, we've seen it in the comments in the last 24 hours, the game plan that Rassie is employing for this game. To have Etzebeth and De Jager coming off the bench in this game, it's going to be huge. That's going to have much more of an impact, I think, than what we saw last week. So I think those are the things that are going to be the differential. But I'm going to wait until Joe Schmidt's named his team, see how disrupted it's been by injuries. And then as we get closer to the weekend, in the next day or two, I'll give my full preview video to this game. But that's what I'm thinking at the moment in terms of what the Wallabies need to look at doing to be successful against the Springboks. So there you go. Let me know now what you think of the things I've said. First of all, do you think the Wallabies can do those things? And do you think if they do those things, they could have a chance of winning this particular game? And did I miss anything out that you think the Wallabies need to use strategically and tactically to be successful again this weekend? Because obviously they're going to have to bring something other than relying on the Springboks to make errors again. And that's going to be a really big key, I think, in this game on the weekend. So there we go. That's what I'm thinking. It's a beautiful day here. So I'm going to go and enjoy it. Thank you for watching my videos. One thing I'll say is, when I watch other YouTube channels, if I've watched that channel for more than 5 times, I consider myself to be a regular visitor to that channel, and therefore I subscribe. So there's a message to you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon. Adios from Cancun. Bye for now.